From a young age, Harper understood that being born into the same family didn't guarantee equal treatment. As the middle child of 3 siblings, she often felt like the one stuck in between, not young enough to be pampered like the baby brother, nor exceptional enough to be celebrated like the eldest sister. In her own home, Harper was a forgotten link left to fend for herself, while attention flowed in opposite directions. Her older sister Valerie was the golden child in their parents' eyes. Valerie had artistic talent and once painted a piece that hung in the living room like some revered masterpiece. Every time Valerie had an exhibition, the whole family showed up and their parents invited friends over just to boast. As for Harper, she graduated with honors in environmental science, earned a full scholarship, and held down 3 part-time jobs through college. But when she shared the news, her mother barely looked up from her phone. "Yeah, we expected that from you. Good job." Her younger brother Mason was the forever baby. He changed schools 3 times in 4 years, abandoned at least 5 online courses, and cycled through dozens of failed hobbies. Yet every time he stumbled, her parents brushed it off with, "He's just finding himself." Harper was never granted that kind of space. She started working in her freshman year, saved every dollar she could, and eventually bought a modest apartment of her own. But her efforts were rarely praised. Her victories were taken as the bare minimum expected, uncelebrated, unnoticed. The monthly family dinners were a clear showcase of this imbalance. Valerie was asked about her projects. Mason was encouraged no matter what half-baked idea he came up with. But Harper. Every time she tried to speak, her father would pivot to politics, and her mother would interrupt with trivial neighborhood gossip. Harper eventually learned to stay silent, to smile and listen, because she understood her voice held little weight at that table. But silence didn't spare her from sacrifice. When she was 16, her parents volunteered her to babysit her cousins every weekend for an entire summer, only informing her afterward. When Harper pushed back, saying she had plans to study for university entrance exams, her mother replied flatly, "Family comes first." That phrase became a constant excuse invoked every time she was expected to give up her time, space, or energy without being asked. As she got older, Harper became acutely aware that her efforts were always viewed as expected. She didn't ask for praise, but she couldn't ignore the bitterness that bloomed every time she watched her parents perform miracles for her siblings. When Valerie was out of work, her parents funded an advanced art program abroad. When Mason lost interest in school, they hired private tutors and bought expensive musical equipment hoping to spark his passion. And Harper. When her laptop died in the middle of finals, all she heard was, "You'll figure it out. You're resourceful." The small apartment Harper purchased downtown after 5 years of relentless work was her greatest achievement. But it was more than a place to live. It was a symbol of freedom and persistence. It represented every rainy shift at the coffee shop, every weekend she stayed home to save money, every all-nighter spent under the flickering desk lamp. Not a cent of family money had gone into it. And yet, once it was settled, her parents casually said at a family dinner, "You have that spare room. Maybe Rachel can stay for a few months." The sentence dropped like a bomb wrapped in silk. It was said lightly, but it hit Harper like a collapsing building. She had thought she'd grown too strong to be shaken, but her throat tightened at the familiar sting. Rachel, who had never contributed a thing, was now being handed keys as though the apartment were communal property. Her parents hadn't asked, hadn't requested, they had decided, as though Harper had no say in her own life. And once again came the familiar refrain, "You should help your sister. That's what family does." No one mentioned all the times Harper needed help and was left alone. Like when her rental room flooded and she asked to crash on Rachel's couch, only to be told, "I'm in the zone with painting, not a good time." Or when she had a high fever and called her parents only to get a voicemail reply, "Rest up, sweetie." Mom's in a meeting. Harper didn't ask to be repaid, but she began to feel like a step stool always there for others to stand on, never asked if she was tired. Harper began to realize her silence had become consent in her family's eyes. She had never lashed out, never caused a scene, and so they assumed she was easygoing, unbothered, willing to sacrifice. They had cast her in this role for years, the sister who was strong enough to handle it, the daughter who would be fine on her own. But what was the cost of being the one who always holds it together empty nights? Quiet tears in darkened rooms, invisible wounds because no one thought she had a limit. She slowly came to understand that family doesn't always equal fairness, and love cannot exist without respect. Harper didn't want to fight, but she couldn't keep living as if her life was merely an extension of someone else's. Everyone has a threshold, and she had finally reached hers. One evening after returning home from another family dinner, Harper sat in silence staring at the wall of her apartment. She realized this was the first time the place truly felt like hers, not just because her name was on the deed, but because she was finally building a life that wasn't rooted in silent sacrifice. She had lived too long as the reliable one, the one who could handle it, the one who never asked for much, and it was time to rewrite the narrative others had written for her. Harper no longer needed external validation to know her worth. She had found it in early morning commutes, in solo victories, in the quiet power of standing up for herself. True worth doesn't come from how much you can endure, but from the moment you choose to say enough when you are being undervalued. It all started with a single offhand comment at family dinner. "Your sister will move into your apartment for a while." The words floated out of Harper's mother's mouth mid-dessert, weightless and uninvited. There was no question mark, no hint of asking. It sounded as simple as borrowing a coat or grabbing an extra chair at the table casual tidy assumed. Harper froze. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a decision. A decision likely made well before this dinner already discussed, just waiting to be announced. Valerie, her older sister, sat beside her with a faint smile, as if everything had been agreed upon already, and Harper just needed to nod along. But that apartment wasn't some spare lodging. It was the result of 5 relentless years of hard work, hundreds of late-night skipped dinners, declined social outings. Harper hadn't just moved in, she had built a life from scratch piece by painstaking piece. And with one casual remark, all her effort was reduced to a spare room open for use. No one asked, "How do you feel about this?" No one said, "If you're okay with it." They didn't need her consent, because to them, Harper's space had never truly been hers. It was just a convenient resource to deploy when needed. She looked around. Her mother calmly sipped tea. Valerie scrolled through her phone uninterested. Her father cut into his pie as if the matter had already been settled. In that moment, Harper felt like her apartment was no longer hers. Worse still, she realized maybe in their eyes, it had never truly belonged to her. The Monday morning after the family dinner, Harper received a message from Valerie. "I'm thinking of bringing my new bedroom set. It'll fit perfectly. You might want to clear out those bookshelves." No greeting, no request. Just a declaration as if the room was already hers. Harper stared at the screen, her chest heavy. Every word dripped with entitlement, erasing her presence from her own home. Valerie didn't ask if it was okay. She didn't say maybe. She said, "I will." 2 days later, their mother called. "Check the guest parking, will you? Your dad's driving the moving truck Saturday morning." "Oh, and empty the fridge so Valerie has room for her stuff." Harper sat frozen at her desk, her earbuds slipping out unnoticed. Every logistical detail had been arranged, with no one bothering to ask if the apartment's owner would even be there. She was no longer part of the plan, she was an obstacle to work around. Her apartment, the one sanctuary she controlled, had now become a family project. She began to feel like a background character in a script someone else had written. A character who was available, who had spare space, who would understand. No one saw that every corner of that apartment held the marks of her resilience. The black and white photo in the hallway was a gift she gave herself after her first month of work. The worn bookshelf assembled over 3 nights with her own hands. Every piece, every detail was part of Harper's soul. And now, the very people she loved most were casually making plans to erase it all. Not out of malice, but without seeking permission either. She was beginning to realize sometimes the worst violations don't come from strangers, but from those who believe they're entitled to your life. Friday arrived. Harper hadn't replied to any messages or calls from her family. She wasn't trying to pick a fight, but she couldn't stay silent and let them believe she had passively agreed. She needed time not to hide, but to plan. She pulled out her lease agreement and read it carefully. The clauses about long-term guests, about occupying shared space without written consent, each one was a legal safeguard. No one could stay there without her permission. That night, Harper sent an email to the building management. She asked specific questions about security policies and what would happen if someone tried to enter her apartment without being listed as a resident. The next morning, she met the manager in person and said clearly, "There might be people trying to enter my apartment this weekend without permission. I want to be sure that's not allowed." The manager nodded firmly. "No access unless they're on file or have a key," Harper exhaled. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. For the first time, she felt entitled to protect her own space without guilt. Saturday, 11 a.m. A motion alert popped up from the building security camera. Harper was at a temporary rental 10 minutes away. She opened her phone. On screen, her parents and Valerie stood at her apartment door carrying boxes, bags slung over their shoulders, faces filled with confusion when no one answered. There was no Harper waiting. No welcome. Just a closed, silent door. A quiet but powerful truth. That apartment belonged to Harper, and for the first time she had defended it. Angry texts poured in, but this time Harper didn't reply. No explanations, no apologies. Because protecting boundaries requires no apology, only resolve. And she knew if she didn't do it today, she might never truly have a space of her own. Not just in square footage, but in peace. After the failed takeover of Harper's apartment, the atmosphere in the Jensen family became so tense that even silence felt accusatory. Valerie sent no more messages, but their mother still tried to maintain a lifeline with guilt-laced affection. "What you did hurt the family, but I know you're just stressed out." Harper didn't respond. She no longer felt the need to explain. Because for the first time in her life, she realized that explaining actions you have every right to take is a waste of breath. That evening, she sat alone in her short-term rental staring out the window. The breeze was gentle, but inside her brewed a gathering storm, not of rage, but of profound awakening. She saw clearly now for years she had played the role of the mediator, the flexible one, the easygoing sibling to the point where her family believed she had no limits. But everyone has limits. And Harper had just found hers. Her thoughts shifted from feelings to strategy. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about reclaiming space. It was about reclaiming herself. She pulled out her notebook and wrote point by point. Review lease thoroughly. Research tenant legal rights. Contact building management about visitor and guest policies. Consider having someone trustworthy stay in the apartment. Avoid confrontation act. Don't argue. Each bullet point was a step away from chaos and toward clarity. Harper understood this much. Her family didn't need a no, they needed a reality so unmovable it forced them to stop. And she would give them that reality not with tears, but with firm boundaries. The next morning, Harper began to act. She returned to her apartment at dawn when the building was still quiet. Not out of fear, but because she wanted to enter that space as its rightful owner, undisturbed, unseen. She walked through every room, checked every corner. Everything was still in place, but something within her had shifted. This wasn't just a place to live anymore. It was where she would reclaim her sovereignty. She changed the digital lock code, installed a discreet security camera in the living room facing the door, retrieved all her important documents and valuables, storing them in a rented off-site locker. Every step was methodical, calculated. Harper wasn't confronting her family with words, she was using control as her weapon. At noon, she met her closest friend Lila at a cafe. Lila had seen countless instances of Harper sacrificing herself for family. "I need someone to stay at my place for a week. It can be you or help me find someone trustworthy," Harper said calmly. Lila didn't even blink. "I'll move in Friday." Back home, Harper sent a short email to the building manager. "I'll have a guest staying temporarily. Documents, ID, and sublease will be submitted today." That evening, she drafted a lease agreement for Lila, clear, legally sound, signed by both parties, with a copy forwarded to building security. No one would enter Harper's apartment without explicit legal approval. The next day, Harper received a message from her mother. "Are you clearing space? Dad's coming early to help Rachel move in." She didn't respond. She didn't need to, because by now her answer was written in action, not words. Saturday arrived. Lila had moved in the night before, bringing a few suitcases and a perfectly timed calmness. Harper handed her the keys, the code, clear instructions, and one final note. "If they come, you don't need to explain. Just tell the truth, you're the legal occupant." Lila smiled. "You've endured enough. It's time they learned something." Harper left early that morning, returning to her rental and setting her phone to do not disturb, but her mind stayed alert. She monitored the door camera feed remotely, watching as her parents and Valerie arrived at exactly 11 a.m., like guests showing up for a prearranged event. They knocked, rang, talked to security. But this time, the apartment didn't belong to their assumptions anymore. When the door finally opened and Lila appeared calm, polite, firm, their faces froze. Valerie panicked. Her mother looked stunned, her father too disoriented to speak. Lila simply said, "I'm staying here legally. All paperwork has been filed with management. No arguing, no discussion, just facts, a legal truth they couldn't ignore." When they left, leaving behind a flurry of angry, frustrated messages, Harper remained silent. She said nothing. No explanations. No blame. Because she knew if she responded now, she'd step right back into the old role, the reasonable one, the flexible one. And that chapter was closed. This quiet action had become the loudest statement of her life. That evening, she wrote a single line in her journal: "Silence isn't surrender. It's saving your voice for the moment it matters. Today, I didn't need to shout. I just needed to keep the door closed." Saturday morning? Harper sat in her short-term rental, hands wrapped around a still warm cup of coffee, eyes locked on her phone screen. The security camera alert pinged at 11:03 a.m., right on schedule. Her family had arrived. On the feed, she saw her parents and Valerie pushing a rolling suitcase, hauling cardboard boxes, and wearing the confident expressions of people arriving at a place they assumed belonged to them. Harper didn't move. No anger, no fear. Just a cold, steady calm. She was no longer the daughter who second-guessed herself every time she went against her parents' wishes. She was ready not to fight them, but to stand for herself. The door to her apartment opened, revealing Lila. Hair neatly tied, crisp white shirt, voice calm but firm. "Good morning. I'm staying here under a short-term sublease. All documentation has been submitted to building management. Silence. Valerie blinked in confusion. Harper's mother furrowed her brows. Her father stood frozen as if doused in ice water. What they thought would be a pleasant move-in was instead met with a wordless, undeniable refusal. Her mother stepped forward, voice low, but laced with familiar pressure. "Where's Harper? We already agreed. She should be here." Lila smiled politely. "She's away on business, and she's granted me full legal authorization. Short, legal, non-negotiable." In that moment, for the first time in her life, Harper felt the balance of power in her family shift. Not because she screamed, not because she fought, but because she forced them to confront what they had always denied she had grown up. And she had rights. The moment Harper's family was turned away from her door, their cheerful demeanor dissolved into fury. Her father started calling nonstop first Harper, then building management. But Harper had muted every number connected to them. She didn't need to hear the old voices with the same tired scripts. This time, she wasn't giving them the chance to emotionally manipulate her. Meanwhile, Valerie, used to always getting her way, began unraveling. She called friends, posted vague social media updates about betrayal by blood and a life of thankless cruelty. None of her followers knew what really happened, but Harper did. This was how her family operated. When plans failed, they turned their disappointment into guilt and weaponized it. That afternoon, Harper received an email from building management. Her father had gone to the office demanding to review the lease and questioning the presence of an unfamiliar occupant. The staff responded clearly, all documents are valid and were submitted in advance. Dissatisfied, he left, threatening to get lawyers involved. Harper gave a dry laugh. She knew her father well. When his authority was challenged, he didn't negotiate. He tried to impose control. But this time, he wasn't facing the soft-spoken daughter he once dominated. He was facing a woman who knew the law, knew her rights, and knew how to say no. By evening, Harper's mother had contacted her aunt, the closest relative, to plead their case. Before long, Harper received a message from her. "Sweetheart, I know you're a good person, but why are you doing this to your sister? She's really hurting." Harper read the message and didn't reply. She sighed. Every attempt to sway her only reinforced what she had known all along. Her family didn't acknowledge fault, they just looked for someone to blame. Sunday passed with an unusual silence. No more constant calls. No more pressure texts. Harper knew it wasn't surrender, it was a tactical retreat, a pause to regroup and replan. Her family wasn't the type to abandon a scheme, they were recalculating their next move. So was she. That afternoon, Harper sat down and wrote a personal memo. Not to send, just to keep for herself, a clear record of what happened, how her family had acted, the steps she'd taken to protect herself, and most importantly, why she did it without guilt. For the first time in her life, she wrote her name at the top of a page, not as a side character, but as the main one. That evening, Valerie sent a message. No more anger, no demands, just a string of sad face emojis and a sentence. "I really don't understand why you did this. I thought you were the one person who'd never turn your back on me." Harper read it. Her chest tightened slightly, but her resolve didn't shake. She typed a few words, then deleted them. Finally, she replied, "I didn't turn my back on you. I just turned toward myself for once." On Monday morning, Harper received an email from her father. Brief, formal, cold. "The family will seek other arrangements for Rachel, but this will leave a scar on our relationship." She smiled, not in victory, but in quiet validation. For the first time, he had used the word relationship instead of duty. Harper knew things wouldn't be magically better. Her family would need time to process the shift. They might become distant, colder. Or maybe, just maybe, they'd begin to see her as a fully formed adult, not a compliant child. And most importantly, she had protected her space with strength, not rebellion. After Harper's family left in silence, her life didn't immediately return to normal, but it began to take on a new tone, quiet, but with substance. Her apartment, once threatened by entitlement, now felt like a real fortress. Harper sensed she had preserved more than physical space. She had claimed psychological sovereignty. The first night she returned home, she didn't flip on the lights like usual. Instead, she stood in the dark for a few minutes, listening to the stillness. It wasn't loneliness, it was liberation. Every object, every wall seemed to whisper, "This is yours now," in every sense. But internal peace didn't mean external calm. 2 days later, her mother sent a short message. "Do you have time to talk? I think we need to clear the air." Harper stared at the text, unsure. She understood that once control stopped working, her family would pivot to negotiation. The question was, did they want to understand her, or were they strategizing a new way to regain control? Eventually, she replied, "We can talk, but I need some boundaries. No yelling, no blaming. Don't call my decisions selfish or rash. If you agree to that, I'm open to listening." 3 hours later, her mother wrote back, "I'll try." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't an apology. But Harper knew in her family the word try was a step forward. The meeting took place on a Sunday afternoon at a small cafe halfway between Harper's apartment and her parents' home. Harper arrived 15 minutes early, not because she feared being late, but because she wanted to choose a seat that gave her full view of the space a sense of control. She picked a quiet corner table near the window where soft sunlight filtered through, casting a calm glow she knew she'd need for what could be a tense conversation. Her mother arrived a few minutes later, her face carrying the familiar mask of practiced warmth, but her eyes weren't as sharp as before. No hugs, no passive-aggressive greetings. Just a slight nod and a gentle opener. "How have you been?" Harper was surprised but didn't show it. She answered, "Better, quieter than before." Her mother paused, then nodded. The conversation didn't unfold like past confrontations, no raised voices, no cross-examinations. Just pauses. And in those pauses, Harper realized something profound. The silence that once came from fear now came from strength. Her mother said that Valerie was still angry, but perhaps starting to understand things aren't like they used to be. Her father had said little, his usual reaction when he felt control slipping away. Then she asked, "Do you think this can be fixed?" Harper looked her in the eye, voice calm. "If people start asking before making decisions for me, then yes. If not, then no." Not aggressive, not pleading, just the truth. And for the first time, her mother didn't push back. She just sighed and said, "I'll think about that." The following week passed in a silence that no longer felt heavy. Harper's family didn't message again. Valerie posted nothing cryptic. Her father didn't call or pressure her. This new quiet, though unfamiliar, felt oddly comforting. For the first time, Harper wasn't being pulled into the spiral of family obligations she hadn't signed up for. She spent time rearranging her apartment not because it needed a makeover, but because she wanted to mark a real beginning. Every object dusted, every corner reshaped, as if she were declaring, "This is my territory now. No one enters without my permission." One evening, Valerie sent a message. No accusations, no guilt trips. Just, "I'm looking for a place to rent. Let me know if you hear of anything." Harper read it, then replied, "I'll ask around. Hope you find something soon." No excess affection, no closing doors, just a way to maintain a healthy relationship no longer dependent. Later, Harper's mother called, but this time she asked first, "Are you free to talk?" One simple question, but to Harper it meant everything. It showed they had started to respect her space and time rather than barging in unannounced. Harper didn't expect her family to change overnight, but she believed that when boundaries are clearly and consistently enforced, respect can be rebuilt starting with the smallest things. And that's what peace truly is, not waiting for others to change, but learning how to protect your own calm from within. After days of tense silence, what surprised Harper was that she didn't feel lonely. On the contrary, it felt like she was truly living for the first time in years. No longer the family member constantly striving to keep others comfortable, Harper now stood as an independent person, clear on her limits and on what she could no longer compromise. And that change opened up a possibility she once thought impossible, rebuilding a relationship with those who had once made her feel invisible. However, Harper knew that a restart couldn't come from a single conversation or a rushed apology. It had to emerge from a shift in behavior on both sides. What she sought wasn't regret, but a new form of respect, quiet but steady. That Saturday afternoon, Harper received a message from Valerie. "I'm near the old cafe. If you're free, can we meet for 15 minutes? No pressure. No demands." Just a simple invitation, and for the first time, Valerie didn't assume Harper would say yes. Harper hesitated. Part of her still wasn't ready. But another part understood that if this relationship were to change for real, she had to try, but this time from a position of equality, no longer as the one always yielding. She replied, "I'm free, but let's keep it to 30 minutes. The meeting took place at their familiar cafe. Valerie had arrived first, and unlike before, there was no arrogance in her posture, just a hint of caution. She didn't begin with complaints or references to being hurt. Instead, she asked a simple question: "How have you been?" Harper nodded, returning a small smile, unguarded, yet no longer overly accommodating. She knew this relationship could only be rebuilt if both of them learned to move slowly and never step on each other's boundaries again. The meeting with Valerie didn't include any dramatic declarations, emotional outbursts, or cinematic hugs, but that very ordinariness was what made Harper feel at ease. They talked about small things. Valerie was freelancing, trying out a morning yoga class. Harper briefly mentioned an environmental project she was working on. Neither of them brought up the past, not out of avoidance, but by choice. Because both women understood that some wounds are best healed through new behavior, not by rehashing old pain. At one point, Valerie hesitated, then said quietly, "I used to think you'd never push back. I honestly thought you didn't get angry." Harper just smiled softly but firmly. "It's not that I never got angry. I just didn't think I had the right to show it." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was acknowledgement. Valerie nodded. She didn't apologize or justify, but by simply staying quiet and truly listening, she showed something had shifted. She no longer saw Harper as the accommodating sister who always carried the load, but as someone with boundaries. At the end of the meeting, Harper stood up first. She didn't say, "Let's meet again soon," or promise anything, but she said, "Thanks for reaching out." A simple line enough to draw a genuine smile from Valerie. As Harper walked home, her heart wasn't racing the way it used to after family encounters. She didn't feel the need to check her phone or brace for guilt-laced follow-ups. All that remained was a quiet clarity. Relationships don't need to be clung to. They can be rebuilt if the people involved know when to stop, reflect, and try again. Weeks after the meeting with Valerie, Harper received a call from her father. It was unexpected. He rarely initiated contact after conflict. His voice was low and direct. "If you're free, I'd like to take you to dinner. Nothing heavy. Just want to see you." Harper paused, then agreed, but not without setting a clear condition. "I'll come as long as it's just dinner. No expectations. No agendas." Her father simply replied, "Understood." The dinner took place at a quiet restaurant. No Valerie, no mother, just the two of them. Her father didn't talk much, but for the first time he asked her about work and listened. Really listened as she described a community project she'd been leading. He didn't interrupt. He didn't nod dismissively. He just listened. And when he spoke, he didn't mention family duty or obligations. He simply said, "You've changed." "I think I need to learn from that." Harper didn't cry. She wasn't overly moved, but something unlatched inside her. Not because the wounds were gone, but because for the first time she felt seen as an adult, as a person. After dinner, there were no promises, but Harper knew that from this point forward, any relationship worth keeping would be one with boundaries, with choice, and with mutual respect. No more unspoken expectations. No more silence for the sake of peace. Every step forward, however small, would be built on consent, not assumption. Harper understood family will never be perfect. But if she had to choose, she'd choose a family that knows how to pause, adjust, and see each other with fresh eyes. And from there, something almost miraculous began to happen. Closeness returned, but no longer tied to sacrifice. Instead, it came wrapped in respect. After everything she had endured, from feeling invaded and disregarded to finally standing up and redrawing her boundaries, Harper realized that the first and most important lesson she had learned was this: silence doesn't mean weakness, but it also shouldn't be used to avoid conflict. In the past, Harper believed silence was the safest way to preserve peace. She feared upsetting family members, feared being labeled the difficult one, so she stayed quiet when decisions were made for her, when her efforts were dismissed, or when unreasonable demands were placed on her. But the more silent she became, the more she was cast as the one who could handle anything, and in that process she slowly lost herself. It wasn't until she chose silence in a different way, silence to observe, to plan, to respond with intention, that she discovered her true power. She didn't need to shout, she didn't need to fight. She could make her point clear through action, through legal rights, through firm boundaries. And the most surprising part, respect began to emerge only when she stopped asking for it and simply acted from a place of self-worth. Harper came to understand silence should never be surrender. Silence, when chosen purposefully, becomes a form of inner strength. She no longer needed to prove she was right. She only needed to hold on to what was right for herself with calm and clarity. One of the most painful shocks for Harper wasn't just her family's attempt to take over her apartment, it was their belief that doing so was completely acceptable. No permission sought, no conversation, just a decision handed down as if it were a pre-approved plan, as though she had no say in her own life. From that experience, Harper learned a powerful truth. Family ties don't grant anyone unlimited access to your boundaries. Love, even within bloodlines, must be grounded in respect. No one is entitled to override someone's autonomy under the excuse of "we're family." Affection doesn't justify control, and family isn't a free pass for manipulation. In the past, Harper had confused sacrifice with duty and accommodation with tolerance. But after this incident, she could clearly see the line between mutual support and emotional exploitation. Without firm boundaries, family love can easily turn into a sweet form of domination. She came to understand healthy relationships aren't sustained by obligation, but by consent and respect. If one person must shrink themselves to keep the peace, then that's no longer a relationship, it's a trap. And when Harper finally said no for the first time, she saw that those who truly loved her began to honor that no, while those who only loved her when convenient simply faded away. In the end, the deepest lesson Harper learned wasn't in the confrontations, the boundaries, or even the quiet defiance. It was in something deceptively simple. If you don't live in alignment with yourself, you can't expect others to treat you with fairness. For years, she had played the role of the peacemaker, the accommodator. the silent bearer of responsibility. But the more she gave in, the more she was stepped over. The quieter she became, the more invisible she felt. Until one day she realized people only treat you the way you allow them to. From the moment Harper started acting in accordance with her true feelings, instead of fulfilling others' expectations, she began to see a shift. Not everyone embraced it. Valerie lashed out. Her father grew distant, but others started to adjust. Her mother began asking before dropping by her aunt, stopped guilt-tripping her, and even Valerie begrudgingly started to acknowledge Harper's perspective. Harper understood that respect isn't something that's given by others. It's something you claim by refusing to let anyone cross your line. It wasn't easy. Sometimes it meant losing approval in order to gain recognition. But in the end, it was the only way to live honestly, not in someone else's narrative, but in her own. As she sat quietly in her apartment, the very one her family once saw as temporary space, Harper knew she had reclaimed more than just a place. She had reclaimed herself, and that was her greatest victory.